I'm George Cheedy. Welcome to The Next Atlanta. There's no doubt our city is a place of diversity and progressive ideas, but oppression and racism still exist. And the only way we're going to see real change here and throughout the nation is if we talk about it. Today, we're looking at how public policy continues to evolve in Atlanta, now 4 months after the deaths of George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks. We're talking to a young leader in the activist community, an established neighborhood advocate, and an expert in criminal justice to help understand what direction we're taking for the next Atlanta. Three months ago, you would have found Devin Barrington Ward in the middle of I-75 South. With hundreds of other protesters, he shut down the interstate in the wake of the Rayshard Brooks shooting. Ward contested for a state Senate seat this year in the Democratic primaries. He's working with the city of Atlanta on criminal justice reform initiatives, like repurposing the city's jail. He's been looking for answers to the phenomenon of young people selling water in city traffic. Devin is representative of the young activists who are pushing hard for policy changes as soon as possible. Devin, how are you?
I'm well, thank you for that great introduction.
I do what I can. I'm glad you're here. Tell us a bit about the activism that you've been engaged in over the last, say, 6 months.
Yeah, the activism that I've been engaged in over the last 6 months, it's future building work. It is the reimagining of our culture, the reimagining of society, and the reimagining of the city of Atlanta. And that reimagining really is centered in what does it mean to be safe in the city of Atlanta? Who is safe in the city of Atlanta? And what is the responsibility of those like the mayor and the city council to ensure that all residents in the city of Atlanta feel safe and not under attack by their own taxpayer-funded police force that oftentimes leads to the death and demise of people like DeAndre Phillips, Oscar Kane, and Rayshard Brooks.
So where do things stand now, from your perspective, from the perspective of a street activist? Are we where we need to be?
We are where we need to be because people who have never taken to the streets, people who never saw themselves as activists, people who never saw themselves as organizers or people who could engage with city council and members of the political leadership in the city are engaging. They're engaging in ways that are traditional, like calling and demanding that the city council remove $73 million in funding from the Atlanta Police Department budget. But they also are engaging in ways that some folks would not say are as traditional, like shutting down the freeway and bringing public attention to the death that occurs on our streets at the hands of APD.
Are there specific policy changes that you'd like to see happen now?
Absolutely. I think the most specific policy change is ensuring that we are and continue to increase the police department budget, that we are actually looking at ways to reduce the police department budget, and that we're looking at ways to reallocate that funding towards more community beneficial public safety measures, more alternative responder models, more programs like Atlanta Fulton Pre-Arrest Diversion. That's the work that I did as a member of the mayor's task force to close and repurpose the Atlanta City Detention Center.
People get weird when they hear the phrase defund the police. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm particularly looking at how older Black homeowners in South Atlanta and West Atlanta, how their relationship with police and relationship with that phrase is different, I think, than your own and those of younger activists who are in the street. Am I mischaracterizing that?
I think you are mischaracterizing it a bit. I live in Bankhead, which is a majority Black neighborhood. I have older Black residents that are my neighbors, and many of them have seen year over year how the police simply respond to crime, that they don't prevent it. Oftentimes that the presence of police inflames tensions even more, and would like to see those resources that are thrown into police actually thrown into parks, recs, programs for young people, entrepreneurship programs instead of sending the police to attack young people who are selling water on the side of our road. And so I believe that it is a bit of a mischaracterization. And to the residents in Southwest Atlanta, what I would ask for them to really do is expand their thinking beyond the current status quo, to get the idea of the police officer in your head that we oftentimes see on TV that is glorified here in this country through our media and our culture and the way that we do television shows and the movies. It oftentimes shows the police as only one-dimensional, that they are truly the valors of public safety in our community, and we know that that's not true. Oftentimes the people who are grounded and holding our public safety are the older Black women on the block who know who's causing trouble and who's not, are the older Black men who are willing to speak to the younger Black men, and not from a place of, oh, I'm your father, or oh, I'm this authority figure, but I'm a member of this community. What's wrong? How can I help you? It's so funny. We don't get upset when we see our schools in Southwest Atlanta defunded. We don't get upset when we see that our parks and recreation are defunded in Southwest Atlanta. We don't get upset at the state and national level when healthcare is defunded. We have defunded all of these things that actually contribute to public safety. When people have healthcare, we are safe. When people have housing, we are safe. When people have jobs, we are safe. When young people have opportunity to expand on their entrepreneurship skills, like selling water on the side of the road, we are safe. Police officers are merely responding to the conditions that we have created through the defunding of all of these other institutions.
How do the messages from street protest turn into actual action?
Yeah, so street protests and the demands of the people and community always has to inform public policy. And so many of us who are activists in the streets and also advocates at City Hall, at the state capitol, and at Fulton County, we know that we have to keep our ear to the street in order to move public policy that is grounded in the needs of our people. And unfortunately, we have a lot of elected officials at the city council, at the county commission, and at the state house who don't understand that, who don't understand what it means to have street-informed public policy.
There's some things that you're working on that I'm fascinated by. Two things that come to mind are the things in Clayton County.
Yes.
And the water boy stuff.
Yes.
Like, pick one.
I'll pick both. Clayton County and the Water Boys are connected in the sense that what's happening in Clayton County with Sheriff Victor Hill and young Black men in Clayton County is the same thing that happens in the city of Atlanta with young Black men who are selling water on the side of the road. We oftentimes look for the police to be the response to young Black men and young Black people when they are acting out, rather than responding with compassion, rather than responding with programs, rather than responding with actually listening and hearing what is it that you need in order to stop acting out. And so what we've seen with Clayton County is that there are older residents who are concerned about public safety, but Victor Hill's approach is not their approach to public safety. Bangling up people at random, using sheriff officers almost as a foreign occupation force in Clayton County that have no relationships with the community is not the way that we move forward. In addition to that, Clayton County has so many different police departments, it almost seems like the sheriff's office is not necessary as far as local policing down there. And as it pertains to the city of Atlanta with Water Boys, it's very important that we stop. We are the city of Atlanta, a city that prides itself on commerce, trade, economic opportunity. When we see young people at the ground level of that economic opportunity, we shouldn't be sending the police. We should be sending more business. We should be helping them find intersections that are better and safer for them to sell their water. We should be creating signage so that motorists know when you come off the freeway, slow down because there's going to be young people there selling water. We should encourage the young people to have Cash App signs so that way there isn't having to be the trade of cash. You know, those are the type of leadership that I want to see from City of Atlanta officials, and that's what the people in the streets want to see. And we continue to see a lack of the translation, but I believe that the power is on our side because city elections are coming up in 2021.
Devin, you've been fabulous. This is exactly what we needed. I'm glad you were here.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you. Bartell is a community leader here in Atlanta. He, at one point, was the neighborhood planning unit chief for Neighborhood Planning Unit J. The city of Atlanta is split up into 25 different neighborhood groups, and Al led one of them. He's also a former mayoral candidate who works on community engagement issues, both here in Atlanta and around the state. And he's lived here for 31 years. Al, I'm glad to have you on the show, and this is going to be an interesting conversation. We've been in a season of protest, and I think the protest is important, but I also think that people from different parts of the city and from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ages, have a very different perspective about what they think should happen. That's what I want to get into a little bit here. So first, tell me about your neighborhood.
You have houses who need rehabilitation bad. You have vacant lots that needs to be developed bad. You have small businesses that are barely making it. And this threat of this corporate foundation for the city of Atlanta is looming. When that Mercedes-Benz stadium got dropped over on the west side on Northside Drive, it was like somebody took a starting pistol and went bang, and that corporate thing swooped across Northside Drive, and all those NPUs over there are now being threatened by that, and that's the threat that we live under.
The gentrification.
Gentrification, yeah.
How would you describe the relationship your neighborhood has with the police department in Atlanta?
As it is with many neighborhoods, the police department see neighborhood as a threat, not as a partner. It's clear that we don't need to defund the police department, but we need to defund police brutality, defund police negligence, defund police obsolescence, and refund police compassion through community-oriented policing. We want that and don't have it.
This idea of community-oriented policing, like, what does that look like in a place like Dixie Hills? Like, what is that? How does that relationship change?
But historically, particularly coming out of the civil rights movement, we all had partnerships. You know, the person who was selling booze and the police lieutenant were brothers and sisters, even though they were from different mothers and fathers, because we all were clear that the future that was available had to be generated by us. But now it's a whole different thing. The archetype of power has invaded our neighborhoods. The drug trafficking is more about power. And so community-oriented policing has to be about partnerships, not about agendas.
How does your neighborhood, and the neighborhoods in general, like, because you've been watching this for a long time, how do they communicate their interests around policing to the mayor and the city council? How does that communication work?
We have two avenues of communication. One avenue is, of course, from activists who scream and cry and howl about not being protected, not being represented, not being taken care of, not being appreciated. Then you have what's called public policy leaders who know that the NPU, the Neighborhood Planning Unit, is where the public policy rubber meets the road.
If you needed to call the mayor or the city council president or something like that, could you get them on the phone?
I could probably have a 40% chance of getting the mayor because she and I know each other, and a 70% chance of getting the president of city council because we worked together before. But that's me because I've been an activist, I've been a leader, I've been a part of the NPU system. Most people don't have that. There's no way.
That's kind of where I'm going with this. Folks who'd been in the street had started to flood the city council with comments.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
18 hours of comments at one point.
Absolutely.
But there's also this sort of secondary communications stream from the NPUs and from neighborhood associations, saying things that you're not necessarily hearing on social media.
Right. Exactly.
Like, do the people in Dixie Hills have a big social media presence?
People in Dixie Hills and West Atlanta, there's 7 NPUs over there. Yeah. They've got a great social media presence, reliable and sustainable.
Is it different from the way younger activists communicate?
Very different.
Tell me.
You know, the social media presence is just about that. And it's very individually me-based. It's effective, but it's me-based. The activists of old school was about us. What happens to us, what happens to you, happens to me.
So let me ask, what are there specific policies that you would want to see enacted? I mean, because you're engaged in this, you understand. Like, what needs to happen now?
We have to fund the small business startups, the small business sustainability, and the small business survival, particularly for urban communities. It's the backbone of who we are. And it's in the shadow of these global economies and global players, it's being pushed to the side. So that's what I want.
It's interesting. I don't think your message is essentially different from that of the younger activists in the street.
It's not,
Like,
because they're entrepreneurs and they're screaming, we deserve to make money and with our families. Street entrepreneurship is alive and well. If we could just get the political players to have a stake in it, like they do in the corporate mechanism.
so I suppose the question for me is, like, what's the holdup?
Yeah.
Like, if the younger activists in the street who are calling for reform around police, and it's nuanced once you actually listen to it.
Oh yeah.
And you compare that to older homeowners
Sure.
who are looking for reforms,
Yes,
which are fairly similar.
right.
Why is it taking any real time in order to get from here to there?
Well, we've had a real challenge at getting street entrepreneurs interested in public policy. They're like, I don't have time for it. That's just a big money thing, and it doesn't impact me. And that's been the challenge. It's getting street entrepreneurs to even register to vote. So there is a gap, and we got to find a way to better hear what's critical to them. And we have those of us who are old folks, in January, I'll be 65. It's up to us to translate that, not up to them. It's up to us.
It's been a weird summer.
Oh, yes, it has, my man.
I wonder to what degree there is a backlash in any meaningful way
Oh, yeah.
by older folks
Oh, yeah.
who are not happy.
There's a backlash because we got real clear. We already did this. And now here we are again in 2020, looking at what was happening in 1920. You got police blowing away black males in broad daylight. In the 1920s, they were hanging them in broad daylight. And so we have to have a new relationship to the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment and remind people that people of African descent are free from violence by law. And those of us who thought we had that handled, the backlash from us is we are massively upset, disappointed, and angry.
Al,
Yeah?
this is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, good.
I'm incredibly grateful that you've been able to come on the show with us.
You're welcome, buddy, anytime.
I'm George Chidi, and this is The Next Atlanta. I'm here with Dean Dabney. Dean is chairman of the Criminal Justice Department at Georgia State's Andrew Young School for Public Policy. The Andrew Young School partners with the Atlanta Police Department and the Atlanta Police Foundation on matters of law enforcement leadership. He is a close observer of the politics and the policy of law enforcement in the city of Atlanta. And I'm deeply grateful to have a moment of your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And really welcome to be here.
So we're catching up with 4 months of public policy change. And just broadly, can you tell us what has changed since the Rayshard Brooks shooting at the city of Atlanta with regard to law enforcement?
Thanks. Good question. I think that what we see is the beginnings of what could become a really significant policy reform effort to re-envision policing, both in terms of the scope of the responsibilities that the police take on, and also with respect to the police community relations and the policy landscape with respect to how they engage citizens in use of force scenarios and in just scenarios in general.
Is there, when we're looking at this, like there have been very loud, very, very strident calls for fairly specific changes to the law and to policy. Some of them are pretty anodyne, like make sure everybody's got a body camera on. Some of them are a lot more difficult to immediately enact, like stripping $80 million out of the police department budget to fund social services stuff. Of the things that are on the table, what do you think are the heaviest lifts? What's the hardest things to try to get done?
Well, I think that we've got to find some common ground in terms of language and in terms of goals, in the sense that the language of defund or abolish the police is very threatening to the police, and so they tend to pull back when such a thing, that language is used. Certainly, I understand the reason why it's used, and this tension between system improvement and system design is certainly real and a tough one to work through. But I think that coming up with specific proposals that are understanding of the fundamental need for police with respect to violent crime and just kind of the current state of affairs. I mean, the police get called for everything from, cat stuck in the tree, kid not doing his homework, up to, barricaded gunmen. And they don't know what they're getting themselves into. I think the case the other night of the shooting, the gentleman demonstrates that the complexities of something like re-envisioning police as it relates to dealing with the mentally ill, right? That body cam video very clearly shows that those officers had no way of knowing they were dealing with a mentally ill individual until it was well down the road. And so trying to figure out best practices and importantly, evidence-based practices, not just what someone thinks is a good idea, not what somebody decided would make a change, but rather we have evidence-based practices out there. We have a great deal of research and systematic review of what works and what doesn't work, and we need to rely on that moving forward.
Where do you see consensus right now? Like, what are the things that the various constituencies more or less agree on?
I think everyone agrees that the police are doing a bunch of stuff that they don't want or they aren't well suited to do. And so I think that there's consensus in the area of either offloading or partnering on mental health calls, offloading or partnering on homeless issues, offloading and partnering on drug abuse issues. I think all of those are very low-hanging fruit, very complex problems, but everyone agrees that these are interactions with the police that don't usually go as well as they could if other people were at the equation, were in the equation, and can go really bad. So taking them and changing the dynamic, I think both the police and the community and the activists agree that's a straightforward agreement.
What else needs to be done, do you think, in order to change how all of this goes down?
Well, I mean, at the heart of this, the really hard nut to crack is police community relations, right? And the practical reality, if you spend time like I do in police cars and you go to neighborhoods that have been under siege for decades, right? The police and the community do not engage in any sort of a healthy dialogue. I mean, the police, no one stops walking unless the police officer makes them. There isn't a whole lot of asking that takes place in those communities. There's a whole lot of telling. And that is a result of years of kind of distancing between them. And that complicates matters, not just in that moment, right? It complicates everyone agrees that the police need to be present for violent crime, right? When things go bad, somebody's got to be there to resolve that dispute. Well, the practical reality is those day-to-day interactions significantly jeopardize the ability of the police to solve homicides, because no one talks to the police because there's no legitimacy or authority respected on the streets. And that's a result of a whole host of techniques and approaches that have been taken from both sides for 30 years. And so until we re-envision how we engage things like criminal markets, things like the investigation of crime, we're going to continue to have that problem. So it's one of those hearts and minds realities, right? And that's a difficult, daunting proposition that requires sustained effort and understanding, right? Because it's just not going to go as you want it to. There's going to be hiccups along the way, and we're going to have the wherewithal to say we're moving in that direction. And as long as we're moving in that direction, that's what matters.
One last question for you. What is a realistic timeline for change, do you think?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Because no matter what change is made, it's going to have to be implemented. And like I just said, there are going to be unanticipated consequences that we have not thought about because we're making big change. There's all these unintended consequences that come with policy reform. And we don't like to admit that on the front end, and then we point fingers on the back end. So, I mean, I think we're talking years, not months. I think it's months to make some policy reform, but it's years to see the benefits.
There are going to be people who hear years and they're going to be dissatisfied with that.
I understand that, but there is no silver bullet. I mean, I like to say to folks when they talk about crime, we've made 30 years worth of bad decisions. We need to make an equal number of good decisions just to get back to normal, right? I mean, you don't get to wipe the slate clean. It doesn't work that way. Policy is complicated. These are human beings in complex organizations. And I wish there was an alternative way, but we have to move in a direction and continue to sustain change. We cannot expect a magic wand to wave and everything to be different. Understood.
Dean Dabney, I'm incredibly grateful for your time. You've been gracious, and this is what we needed. It's clear that despite how far we've come together, we still have much more work to do together. We must continue to push for policies that treat Black people like people and not objects to be policed. We must continue to fight for the dignity of human life, especially those who've been marginalized, brutalized, and oppressed. And the bottom line is this: we want you to take action. You can see all the episodes of The Next Atlanta on fox5atlanta.com and see how to get involved in your community. And lastly, one of the most important elections in history is coming up. Register to vote. And vote, please, do your part. I'm George Cheedy. Thank you for watching The Next Atlanta.